is part of Carmella's story, because Carmella and Thomas lived here for about 25 years. And then there is a fantastic, it's awful to say, but divorce in December 7th, that day, of course, 1876. Apparently, Carmella came home and found Thomas with the maid. And it's all documented in court documents. But my favorite part of the story is Carmella took the fire poker and beat the hell out of both of them. So again, I want to know more about this woman.
Well, one thing I can tell you, Bill, is don't mess with a Latina.
Yeah.
Okay?
Like,
that's number one right there.
She took the kids and
Welcome, I'm Chef Rodney Baca, and this is Shop Talk. Welcome, I'm Chef Rodney Baca, and this is Shop Talk. I'm here with a very, very good friend of mine, CEO of History San Jose, Bill Schroh. Bill, how you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
So before we do anything, something you always come see me about, I have to put it out in front of you. And the way I look at things is, if we're going to BS with each other, we got to break bread. So it's your fried chicken and fries awesome. With your ranch and ketchup.
Thank you. That's awesome. That's one of my favorites.
So in starting, we're here. Thank you for letting us be here at the Fallon House. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the house. We're in the garden right now. So.
Sure. Well, we're downtown San Jose. And as you said, we're at the Carmella and Thomas Fallon House, which is an historic site in the city. It was built around 1854 or so. We're not quite sure when the house was built. But when it was built, it was like a mansion in this particular area of the city. Everything around us were adobes, like the Proth adobe next door. So this really was like a show place. It was a home until about 1870 or so, and then it became a hotel. It fell under disrepair, and then in the 1990s, the city put together an organization to rebuild it and restore it, and it's been open to the public ever since.
Okay, so how do I get in the Fallon House? Like, what can I do to get in? Because I have actually been in the Fallon House, but how could someone else see this?
Well, the Fallon House is open for tours. It's open for, they're all guided tours, but you have to go online and buy tickets ahead of time. You go to History San Jose, and you go down to where you can buy tickets for tours. It's open every weekend right now, and we're just doing 2 tours, one at 10 and one at 2. But right now we're closed until further notice. Eventually we will be reopening though, but there are public tours when we can open.
Okay, so let's just dive in.
Sure.
Let's start talking a little history here. You and I have just been talking about like the Peralta house, or Luis Peralta, or his wife Maria Elviso. I find it also fascinating because it's from, let me say first, my wife is born and raised, you know her very well, yes. Madeline, here in San Jose. So she is also Mexican, and that Latin kind of feeling resonates in her. So I was hoping you could tell us kind of a brief little history about that, because it's such an amazing history here.
Well, people don't realize how, as you said, how amazing the history of San Jose is. Where we are the first civilized settlement in California. Right away,
crazy.
We don't, because we're a small city, and we're in the shadow of San Francisco, but we are an important historical city the way California was founded. It was first came up here was the Anza expedition in 1775-76, and it blows your mind to think that George Washington and his army is fighting the British on the East Coast. Meanwhile, there's settlers expeditions coming up, trying to find the bay in San Francisco, trying to find presidios, trying to settle presidios, trying to settle cities, and San Jose is one of those cities. San Jose was founded as a farming community to bring food to the presidio in San Francisco in 1777.
That's so crazy, because I remember you and I were here, we were giving a tour. I'm not going to say names, but you know who you were talking to, and that person, who's pretty prominent here, thought, you know what? All this was going on in the East Coast. Sure. It was kind of like a wild, wild west, as they'd say, but not even to that extent, because he was more of like the Native Americans were here just fighting each other, and you're like, my friend.
That's right. There's
So,
a whole culture that was being developed here. The Ohlone Indians were here, then the Spanish came in, Eventually Mexico would secede from Spain and create its own country.
Right.
So then you have a Spanish period, and then by 1849, California is part of America. So there's these 4 periods that are just amazing before California ever becomes a state.
Isn't that
And they all have
crazy?
their incredible histories. It's insane.
But how do we get that out? Like, cause like I'm so interested in all that. I love history. I mean, like the Ohlone, you and I were talking just a minute ago, and I'm like, well, where are they now?
Sure.
Where is there a reservation? Is there something about it? And how do we find more about it?
Well, one of the things that History San Jose is doing is we are building a Malacca Heritage Center. At History Park, we're dedicated to giving all of the different groups that have settled San Jose their story. We want each group to tell their own story. Like we have a Chinese museum and they tell the immigration story of the Chinese and where they are today. We have an African American house and they tell their story. We have a La Raza house and they tell their story. But one of the things we felt we were missing was the Ohlone story. And that's one of the things that we've just, we have a grant, we're starting to begin, we need to raise more money, but that's our goal, is to have that story as well, because we want every piece of California history being told at History Park.
See, and I think that's amazing. And you and I just hit on it, but we're talking about everything going on there, but there's a history of different races, different ethnicities going on here from, and I always tell people with history, you got to bring the news.
Yes,
you got to bring
absolutely.
accurate news. It's good, bad, and ugly.
Correct.
And you have to just be able to dive through the whole thing
Absolutely.
to learn what really happened,
Correct.
right? And so when you talk about that, we talk about History Park now.
Mm-hmm.
You have all these different kind of factions there. Like who tells those stories? Do you have people that come in? Or is it all you? How does it work?
We don't. History Park was founded in the 1970s when there was the realization that the history of San Jose was going under the wrecking ball, like we see now.
Yeah.
But so they started to pick up buildings and move them to what's now called History Park, which is part of Kelly Park.
Yeah.
So over the years, they brought in these buildings in, but they told the story of really the American settlers,
Yeah.
the 1850s story. But back in the 90s, they decided we need to open this up. As you said, there are many, many groups that founded California, and they need a place to tell their story. So the various buildings of History Park have been given over, regardless of the house was built in 1850 by John Smith. It is now, for example, the African American History House.
That's awesome.
And they've taken over the building, and we tell the story of the building, but then the inside, you hear the story of the African American history story, how they got to California, what their story in San Jose is, all the way up until today. Or, for example, again, the Chinese Museum tells the story of the Chinese in San Jose and their story all the way up till today. So there's a combination of real buildings and a combination of restored buildings. Like our Chinese museum is one of the temples that used to sit where now the Fremont Hotel is, because that was the Chinatown.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that was all burned down by arson back in the 1870s, on purpose, of course.
You don't sell, we're gonna burn.
Exactly.
You don't sell.
So a lot of the Chinese community actually moved up to San Francisco, or they moved into what is we call today Japantown. It was really before the Japanese took over that area. That was a combination of Japanese and Chinese. But we have photos, and the temple there is one of the temples that once sat in the original Chinatown in San Jose.
See, that's so amazing. And so is there a way, like if someone wanted to do a party at History Park,
Sure.
they could do it by booking Baca Catering, I might add. But is there a way that they could do a party there? And where could we find these kind of things out?
Yes. The main goal of History San Jose, either at our sites downtown, like the Fallon House or the Peralta Adobe next door, or History Park, is to educate the citizens for free of San Jose about the history of our city and our area and our county and the whole valley, actually. However, we're a nonprofit, so we do need to raise money. And some of the ways we raise money is by education programs, but we also raise money by renting the park for events, for parties, for weddings. All that money goes into the pot, so we can do what we really do, is to educate folks about our combined past.
And I think preserve history.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And I
Yeah.
think that's pretty amazing. So we're going to get back to that, but I
Okay.
want to talk to you a little about you.
Okay.
How did you get involved? Like, where did you get this passion for history? Because I have it, and I can tell you just real quick, because I want to focus on me now. No, I'm kidding. Is that with food, that's what I do is I cook, but there's such a history to food, from the cultivation to the
Sure.
product to whatnot. And now looking here, just going back to San Jose, how the Ohlone provided the chilies and so on that could go up to Monterey and to San Francisco and everywhere from this area, San Jose. But that's something I look at all the time when I'm doing food. How did you get involved in history and get so passionate about it?
Well, it started with my grandparents. My grandmother loved to take us to museums, and my grandfather hated it. So he had a deal. He would drive her anywhere, and then we would go on the museums, and I never forget, he would sit outside with a cup of coffee and a cigarette, and just wait for us to come out.
Yeah.
So we went all over the East Coast, up and down, visiting all kinds of museums. So I kind of had that passion. And then when I went to college, I wanted to be a history teacher. I said I'm going to be a high school history teacher and be a track coach. I ran track in high school and I ran track in college, and that's what I was going to do. Well, after I graduated, couldn't really find a job, started looking around, said, you know what? I'm going to volunteer at this particular museum called Van Cortlandt Manor. Started volunteering there, absolutely loved it. They offered me a part-time job. Said, sure. Then they offered me a full-time job running their education program. And from that point forward, I was hooked on American history. But not just that, I looked at it as now I am teaching American history, not necessarily in a classroom, in a huge setting, a much more amazing setting, using this historic house and these artifacts to teach people about where we are, where we came from, and where we can go. And first Van Cortlandt, then I moved to a place in New Jersey called Liberty Hall, which was another amazing historic house. And then I've been there, was there 20 years, and it was time for a change. So looking through what was, the help wanted on the internet, said, there's a job in California. I looked at my wife and said, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. She goes, California? We've never been California in our lives. So they flew me out after a week of interviews. I said, you know what? Would you like the job? Sure. And it was just it's been an amazing experience out here. And I just loved, I'm still learning. That's the big thing. I've only been in California a year now, and I'll be learning the history of this place for the rest of my life. It's just an amazing thing.
It is. I mean, it's so funny because I love the California history, and it's not told.
No,
and that's
it's not.
why, like, when you came, and we started talking, I'm like, wow, man, I get to learn. You're learning. You're teaching. It's such a cool thing.
It really is.
And at this point, like, that takes me to the next thing is, like, we're talking about this beautiful Fallon House. And it's such a crazy dynamic here because you got high rises going up right behind us. You got the San Pedro Market and then the Peralta House, which is absolutely stunning. But this house is right in the middle of Technology Central.
Yes, it is.
And when you walk in, it's like going back to 1850. It's such a crazy thing. But can you tell us a little about the house because we're not going to, you have to come pay for the tour, people. You got to pay for that tour. It's important. But can you tell us a little about the house, about like just some history of it?
Sure. As I said, it was built in the 1850s by Thomas and Carmella Fallon. It's a classic, what's called a Italianate Victorian style. It's a type of style that was being designed by then. It's a huge house for its day, and it's been restored to how it looked probably around the 1860s. So when you go inside and you close the doors, you said, Rodney, it's you can't even hear the outside world, and it is a step back in time and a feel about that Spanish, Mexican, early American, because that's the folks that lived here.
Yeah.
Carmella's family originally was one of the original. Her ancestors, her great grandfather was on the De Anza expedition.
That's insane.
So that's insane. That her family goes all the way back to when the Spanish first settled this area. Thomas Fallon was an immigrant, like most of us are, families are. He came from Irishman, and then somehow meandered his way to California and married Carmella. They would have 9 children. They would grow up in the house, and they both have their stories to tell. Now, it's interesting because I'm doing a lot of historical research at History Park right now about the various houses and the families, and I found an old training manual for tour guides from 1977, and it has all these things you're supposed to tell people.
Yeah.
Do you know in the whole book there's not one woman?
No.
It's all men, and it tells you how much we have changed in these, God, it's 40 years now. 40 years of history. Now we don't tell just the George Washington story or the Thomas Fallon story.
Yeah.
We want to tell, we want to know all the stories about, as I said, Thomas and his wife Carmella and her mother Martina and his daughters. Like, I'm so intrigued by that whole world. I want to read more research and get them, you know, the little things that I can find in, you know, classic, like, well, they married, they had kids. But what else was there? Because in Mexican culture, especially in a California Mexican culture, women had a lot more rights than American women in the East Coast.
Isn't that's not told though?
No.
That story's not told.
And even with finances, women in Mexican California, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to say that, make sure I say that right, but they had more control over their money than women on the East Coast. So there's a whole dynamic here that's not, those are huge things that I'm sure Carmella was worried about marrying this guy Thomas and how the money came. And this house mostly probably was her money because she inherited money from her mother. Now her mother is another amazing, Martina, as far as we know, was the first woman to get a rancho.
See?
And that's another, like, a woman, you know.
But can I ask you a question real quick? So is that where we get like Castro Valley or the Castro, like there's an actual Castro Fallon House in San Francisco as well?
Correct.
I'm thinking
that is part of Carmella's story, because Carmella and Thomas lived here for about 25 years. And then there is a fantastic, it's awful to say, but divorce in December 7th, that day, of course, 1876. Apparently, Carmella came home and found Thomas with the maid. And it's all documented in court documents. But my favorite part of the story is Carmella took the fire poker and beat the hell out of both of them. So again, I want to know more about this woman.
Well, one thing I can tell you, Bill, is don't mess with a Latina.
Yeah.
Okay?
Like,
that's number one right there.
She took the kids and moved out.
Yeah.
But then Thomas also moved out. So nobody lived here for the next 25 years. The family just abandoned the house.
Really?
Like, to just sit here?
So out of curiosity, I was reading up. When the family abandoned the house, at a certain point, the American flag came down and the Mexican flag went back up for a little while.
Yes.
Was that during that period?
No, it was all, the house was built before all that happened.
Okay.
So that was all, that was done by 1850. The house was built later in the 1850s.
Okay.
But then you said Carmella gives up living in San Jose altogether. She first moves to Santa Cruz for a while, but then we find her in San Francisco, where she starts to invest in real estate. Again, a woman investing in real estate at the time. Maybe California is a little different, but to me that's like, she was making her own fortune. And
but it's different because the story's not told.
Yeah, and then she, one of the buildings that she builds, as you said, is the Carmella Fallon building. That's what we call it today. She built the building on, I can't remember the street address, but she built the building. And then in the earthquake of '06, apparently, again, these are all the stories that come to us. Whether they're true or not, they're still great.
Yeah.
The city's on fire. She goes and battles the fire to protect her building. So she's out there with a fire brigade, apparently. And if you look...
Don't mess with a Latina.
No, and,
okay?
apparently if you look at the line of buildings where that building is located, the other side of the street are all new buildings from that point forward. From her side of the street forward, there's still, that whole neighborhood is still all the old buildings.
We want to keep that.
So her building survived, and it's still today, it's still being used. Now it's an LGBT headquarter building in San Francisco.
Okay. Well, I just think it's such an amazing story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny because then we go back to history. It's like it's just not told.
Correct.
Things are not told.
Correct.
When I was growing up, and I grew up in New Mexico, and our history was so kind of black and white, right? So you get like George Washington's your first president.
Sure.
You and I had a discussion. Southern states will argue that fact, but that's what we have. But there we have a lot of the Pueblo Indians that the history's not talked about. And then we have some ruins that go back 1,200
I
years.
know.
And the history's really not talked about, and you don't hear it. There's things like White Sands where they were testing the bombs and things like that you hear, but you don't. Here, I equate it somewhat because, like, we talked about the Indians, and now with the Native Americans, and now with the Fallon House and Carmella and her mother. And then if you even go back a little bit further with Luis Peralta
Correct.
and Maria Alviso, and all these names are here in San Jose, right? You
Correct.
hear
There's
them like
street names,
Alviso,
there's names.
Dianza, you
Correct,
hear this,
correct.
and it's like there's a correlation, there's something there. When we should discuss it more, and that's why I'm so happy that you've joined, because you're actually educating all of us
I'm
and
trying.
giving us that knowledge, and it's not free, people, okay? But it's knowledge that we can take and
Correct.
teach the next generation
That's
and so
right.
on, and continue to learn.
And as you said, it's the good and bad and the ugly. It's all part of the story, and it all needs to be told.
It does. You know, I was telling you about the Comanche, and they were horse people. They mastered the horse. That's what gave them that great warrior kind of thing, and people feared them. But you know, when they conquered something, it wasn't a nice sight to see. But that was part of the history,
That was part
right?
of the culture. Yeah,
and there's so much more involved in talking about it. And you know, think about here.
I know.
You know, the gold mines and what happened and so on. I mean, there's some bad history.
Absolutely.
And think about the Donner Party, you know, but that did get out there. We got to learn about that.
And speaking of the Donner Party, which is it's another piece of history that I didn't know. So Donner Pass, there was in the height of train travel in the early 1950s, I think it was 1952, there was a luxury train that went from Chicago to San Francisco. It was called the City of San Francisco. It got caught in the Donner Pass in a blizzard for 3 days.
Wow.
People were trapped on the train. They ran out of fuel, they ran out of water, they ran out of food. They had to like send up rescue parties to like rescue, and I think only one person died. But it's this weird, amazing story that I just stumbled upon one day, and there's like newsreels from it, like helicopter newsreels of this train trapped.
That's so crazy.
So you know about the horrible original Donner Party.
Yeah.
But then there's like this other like.
And it's like, whoa! It's like the old war with us and the British War of 1812. Yeah, no one talks about it, but it's there. You know, there was a Revolutionary War, and then the Brits wanted to come back and take over, and there was an 1812 war for a while.
Well, the historians call that war the Sons' War, because if you look at most of the leaders of the War of 1812, all their fathers were heroes in the Revolution.
Really?
It's almost like they needed a war to justify their.
It's like a big guy, a little guy in a big truck.
Yeah, it really is. It's really funny when you look at that.
That's crazy. So, last thing, Bill, tell us about donation. Tell us about how we get in touch with History Park and to get our history here of San Jose preserved and saved and told.
Well, History San Jose is a 501c3 nonprofit. If you go to our website, historysanjose.org, you can donate. But we don't just, take donations. As you said, our motto is preserving our heritage. And one of the things we also do is we collect objects. We collect our physical things from our history. So we have a whole department that if you have things that you think are important, you could reach out to our research department, and we could, either if you want to donate them or not donate them. But the point is that we continue to this day to collect the history of the valley all the way back to the Ohlone Indians.
And I totally forgot, but to the extent of, there's actually tech history there too.
Yes, there is.
We've got Apple computers.
We have one of the first Apple computers that that still works, and we had the great Woz come and turn it on.
Really?
So yes, we have.
And I just think it's great because you guys are like maintaining a history from way back, as we said, up into current kind of dates and whatnot.
Because a lot of times if you go to an historic house like the Fallon House, it's stuck in one. It's only going to showcase like 10 years. Or 20 years. The History of San Jose is showcasing the entire history of San Jose and the valley, and that's one of our greatest things that we can do.
I think it's amazing. Bill, It's been an honor and a pleasure. This is one of many. Thank you. And let's break some bread.
Great.
Awesome.